there's so many people trying to tackle all the issues around preserving these natural spaces and wildlife. And there are a lot of also short-term strategies involved, and those are needed often to kind of hold the ground.
100%.
But unless there's that bigger change long-term, and a lot of that, like you said, it starts with education, we're kind of fighting a losing battle, because people are starting to get wise and realize that we need to really involve local communities, have them take ownership, and
Absolutely.
have them manage these places. But if the education system is set up in a way where it's really hard for them to even be able to, read in the language that is kind of a global language now, whether you like it or not, English, then it really, like you said, sets a ceiling and doesn't allow for that growth long term and the ability to hand over these different projects or businesses to local community members.
Absolutely. And I think that the concept of ownership in the wilderness, in the wildlife economy. So if we now talk the broader, we've talked a lot at the moment about like Tanatula as a business and what we're doing, but of course there's a huge broader community that we're part of. I've been fortunate to be on the executive committee of the Timbavati since 2011, so I've had a view into what that broader landscape is, and then through work with the Sandparks people and the Greater Kruger Strategic Development Framework, have a view even broader than that. Not just the private reserves, but the national parks, and then the Greater Limpopo Transfrontier Conservation Area, which are these huge landscapes and involve so many different people and so many different landowners, communities, business types, personal views and agendas, all of those things. So that landscape has been, I have to say, massively successful, but it is not without its challenges. And the big challenge for us is that as a wildlife economy, the wildlife economy has to be relevant to the communities in which that economy is embedded. I've said this so many times, and it's a bit of an odd analogy, but I'm trying to get away from the concept of who's the community. When one talks about community development, there's often this sort of, this view that it's a charitable process. So I always say, let's take the banks in Sandton. If all of the banks in Sandton and the banking economy of Sandton, who's their community? It's the Sandton community. It's the shop owners. It's people who live around there. It's the malls. It's the people who own and run buildings. That's their community. Now, if the banking community chose to spend its money in a way that excluded their community, they would not be welcome in that community. And if the banking community was not really making any money and was, kind of a bit of a bleed on that community, they would also probably not be that welcome in that community. So if we translate that to where we are, now we're in a rural environment, and the wildlife economy is defined by one thing: it needs space. We cannot build thousands of beds in multi-story hotels and, just, make this thing work through volume. It doesn't work, because we need to protect the thing that we are sharing with our guests, and that is this massive open space. So what that means is that you cannot, A, have a lot of operations in these reserves. B, you cannot employ everybody. You cannot employ the thousands that a mine could employ or that an agricultural activity to employ. So you need to think in a different way as to how you can impact the community that you're embedded in with that low density of economic activity. And I mean, don't get me wrong, we have a big economic impact. If I look at what our contribution to the GDP, and I'm going back to a study that was done in 2016, it's grown since then. We had like a 6.7 billion rand overall economic impact to the country back in those days when the study was done. So it's a significant industry for an area that is rural. And so what you're saying about ownership in that wildlife economy is the critical thing. And you're right. you don't get to proper ownership and proper participation in that economy unless you have proper education of the people. And that's where we're still, finding the challenges. And again, what you were also alluding to, the point about there's short-term strategies, and particularly the work that you guys have focused on educating people about, and focused energy on, is the protection services that we have for the wilderness landscapes. Absolutely critical. Without the increase in capability in those protection services and area integrity services over the last 15 years, since 2008, I think we would have long ago lost every rhino. We would have long ago lost the next thing that would be on the list after the rhinos were gone. So it was absolutely crucial that we consolidated a strategy to, increase the security capabilities of these reserves. But as you say correctly, and there was you can pick it up in the press somewhere, and sometimes journalists are, they're kind of like a bit mischievous, and they talk about a fortress mentality and so on. And yes, we've had to implement a fortress mentality just to
stabilize
the situation. Exactly. And I feel that that's been done exceptionally well. And now we're all very, with eyes wide open, we're all looking outward to say, okay, now how can we change the involvement of the community in the wildlife economy to the extent where they become owners? And that ownership could mean, and I think you and I were talking about this a little bit before, and it's something that the Timbavati is very involved with as a pilot project, is a very specific intervention to say, okay, let's take the lodges, the commercial operations, let's take the reserve itself, so the reserve that is managed by a team. All of us, we all buy stuff. We need stuff. We need, food for our meals, we need drinks, but we need more than that. We need services for our Land Rovers. We need, or our game viewers. Let's not be let's not be brand specific. We need services for our game viewers. We need air conditioners to be serviced. We need tents to be repaired. We need builders. We need thatchers. We need all of these things are things that we buy, right up to bookkeeping and accounting services, and more high-end stuff, auditors. So, if we're buying all that stuff, if we work together as a group, could we establish a consolidated demand within the reserve that then we could look and say, okay, where are we buying it from? And if it is Joburg or Cape Town or Nelspruit, could we, rather than doing that, get a coalition of the willing together that say, let's rather hyper-localize our purchase of those items or those services. So that's a program that we started on about 4 years ago, and it kind of got accelerated during COVID because there was a very strong desire, and that desire has played out quite well in the Greater Kruger landscape and all of the reserves involved in the Greater Kruger to, after COVID, let's build this thing back better. We've got an opportunity to do it in a better way. So we've been working on this for about 4 years, and accelerated during COVID. COVID, obviously, a portion of it was like a halt, and then we came back and said, okay, hang on a second, this is the way that we can do it. So initially, coming from Sandpark side, so understand that Sandparks, as the Kruger, as the national park, they're also very focused on doing this. What they were talking about, though, was to implement a landscape-wide program. In other words, do it at scale. And our philosophy was, if you try and do it at scale, it will fail because of the scale, because it's just too big. So we said, what if we take a smaller project, get one or two of the reserves together, or even one, it's turned out to be one, and the lodges within that reserve, and get them to identify businesses in the local community that is around them and say, okay, which of these businesses are ready to engage with us? Which businesses, by the way, are already engaging with us? We already have 2 businesses that are part of the enterprise development program, and they have been supplying services into the reserve for years already. Now they're on a higher tier of development where they are getting down to how's their health and safety managed? What are their HR processes? Are they, all of their statutory compliance in terms of tax and that type of thing? And then there are ones that are next level down who are kind of informal, but ready to take that step into sort of a more formal economy. And then there's the pure startups who I want to do this, I'm doing it with my neighbors, and I'd like to be able to do it into the broader economy. So we've identified those, and we already have now 10 businesses that have been selected that we are specifically engaging with. And we've brought in an external mentoring business, actually, called Indalo Inclusive. And their job is that their entire role is mentoring businesses from informal to formal. How to, make sure that you are compliant with all of the variety of rules that South Africa has in place for a business to operate in.
It's almost like an entrepreneurship incubator in a little way.
It is an incubator. Yeah. It is an incubator, exactly. And so they're involved. And then we're involved all on the buying side, including the reserve management. And then, the businesses themselves on the ground are involved. So we've kind of found each other. And now the next step in that story is for us to continue to do business in such a way that it encourages other people to do the same thing. So what we want is we want runs on the board, we want successes. We want to say, these guys are supplying reliably, with the right quality, and at the right price for any of the businesses in this area to utilize them.
Yeah, and then they can expand to other reserves and kind of convince them to get more involved in this as well.
And then their businesses grow. And when their businesses grow, then the wealth of the community grows. And the more of those businesses, the more we can scale that. And I very strongly believe it needs to start on a small scale. And that's why we've had the successes that we've had so far. And we're still early days, but we've had successes and we are moving. Now, you then organically grow that scale. So once you've actually established a model that works, you can say, okay, there it is. You guys can use the same idea, and you can contact that network, and they're already supplying, and so on. So you make it an easy thing to plug into. And then the next step from there, of course, is that the business incubator guys have to help those businesses get ready to scale, because then they'll actually start scaling properly, because then they have to now supply a broader range of customers. So there's a lot of business planning associated with that, and we want to make sure that it doesn't overwhelm them and they end up going like, oh God, no, I can't do this anymore, or they compromise on quality or availability or whatever. So this process has to be managed really carefully and in such a way that those guys fully succeed. And when they have fully succeeded, then we have ownership in the wildlife economy, and it's something that is on the agenda of national government. They've literally, our Minister of Environment and Fisheries and Forestry, she was here. They actually were at the headquarters of the Timbavati, where, by the way, and we'll talk about him, where Anton actually spoke to the minister about some of their challenges and some of the things that he sees as necessary to be in place. And she really heard him. But we also she brought up the issue of we need more ownership, broader, more inclusive ownership. And we said, yes, this is what we're doing. And so government has got that high on their agenda, and they also then need to see what it is that we are doing to create that ownership in the wildlife economy.
Yeah. Man, that's amazing, because I feel like, even in the States, there's similar topics, I guess, in terms of, bringing minorities into leadership positions and making it more inclusive. But I feel like often the development part is left out, and what happens, and then this ends up creating arguments between sides, is you force someone into a position that maybe they're not ready for, not that they don't have the potential to develop into it, but then it kind of, the naysayers then get to come in and say, hey, well, this isn't working, like it's going to fall apart. So thinking about the education side, and then also how to include other businesses. It reminds me a little bit of, I lived in Los Angeles for a little bit on the, as a filmmaker, try to get out there and make that happen. But I don't know what the percentages are, but that whole, a very large part of that community is based around that entertainment industry. And like you said, there's only so many jobs that are directly involved in, say, the wildlife conservation economy. But then there's all these indirect companies that are supporting.
Yeah.
And the more they're able to be involved and support and build their businesses, then they have more money to spend within their communities, and then restaurants and other things start to pop up more.
Exactly.
And so it's just this cycle that you really have to get people to believe in that long-term vision to be able to start it on that small scale and build it over time.
You've hit the nail on the head, and we've actually seen what you referred to as, people being injected into, positions through no fault of their own, have not yet developed the capacity to do things. And then, of course, the very first thing that happens is that the naysayers go, you see, it doesn't work,
Mm-hmm.
But if it had been done in the right way, it would have worked. So, the intention to get there is the one thing, and I think we all know where that destination is, but how we get there and the strategies around making sure that we get there successfully is actually more important. So I think that, not to blow our own trumpets, but I do think that what's being done in the timbavati is pretty unique, it's pretty forward-thinking, and it's being done in a way that I think is got a great chance of being very successful and scalable.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, like, and review our podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple.